So in this video, I want to take you through the second principle of effective scientific writing, namely to structure sentences to enhance readers' experience. Now that's a big phrase to say, keep your sentences as short as possible, as much as possible. Doesn't mean you can't have a long sentence. As a matter of fact, you will have long sentences in your scientific writing and science writing in English. That's normal. But you really should try to train yourself when you're revising and editing your work to really look for where can you shorten another sentence. And I'm guilty as charged of this because this is one of the principles, or one of the principles I struggle with most. And when I'm drafting, I tend to have sentences in there that are very, very long. It might be because my native language is German, and in German we tend to construct very long sentences as well. If any one of you ever studied German and try to read some German texts, I salute you, and I also pity you, because the sentences tend to be very long. And the English language really does not lend itself towards extremely long sentences. There are different rhetorical moves like transition expressions, breaking things up with different punctuation, that work much more effectively, especially for the reading mindset of somebody who operates in English most of the time, be they a native speaker or non-native speaker. Okay, so I will show you a few examples. And actually, before you get started, let me go back to the slide. Make sure you have handout 9 in front of you. Is that correct? Yes, it's handout 9. It will have the paragraph that I'm taking you through for some sentence length reduction in front of you. It's a very technical paragraph, and I chose it actually because it's very technical. So unless you work in this field, you probably will have trouble understanding. I mean, I certainly did, what the exact terms mean, but it's, I think, really useful for that, because even by really reducing the sentence lengths, we can actually add a lot more clarity to what this paragraph is saying. I worked with a colleague of mine in the School of Medicine on this. So the first example you won't see on your handout. It's this first paragraph here. PARP cytotoxicity is partially mediated through trapping of PARP at sites of DNA damage, with next generation PARP such as talazoparib being potent PARP trappers. There's nothing really wrong with the sentence, actually not even too long, but I wanted to show you a quick trick that I like to do when I find I'm having too many long sentences, and this would be one where I could easily make 2 sentences out of it. So, and I'm going to insert it right here. So if you look at the revision on the bottom, PARP cytotoxicity is partially mediated through trapping of PARP at sites of DNA damage. Period. These next generation PARPs, such as blah blah blah, are potent PARP trappers, right? Difference is minimal. I do like this though, because I often see writers use a lot of ing forms, which we call the gerund. Not that you ever have to remember this, it's a grammatical term. If you studied Latin, it's a very common way in the Latin language, in romantic languages, to really to use the gerunds. And in English you can as well, but I have my experience, and in my experience, academics overuse this. So this is a great example of reducing sentence length. You have some sort of addition to your sentence with an ing form. Just make that into a next sentence. And I like also that you can use here these next generation PARPs, namely the one that you've mentioned before, and then you have a smooth transition. I think it makes for better reading. All right, so now look at your sample paragraph on your handout. It's the one here on the screen. Again, it's very, very complicated. And I want to point out a few things in the first part of the paragraph, and then later on in the second part. So we're going to focus on the first part first. So this first sentence is a great example of sentence length that has gone haywire. So it starts off the smallest of the URFs, comma, blah, 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 has been identified. So one of the common areas I find is very tricky, I find, let me put it this way, separating your subject and your verb with an insertion, right? The smallest of the URFs, namely this and this and this, has been identified as, is avoidable and really a good idea to avoid because it helps your reader make more sense of your sentence. So rather than separating them, move them together. So here is my revision of this. So the original is here. The smallest of the URFs has been identified. So my suggestion for revision would be first attempt actually to shorten the long sentence. The smallest of the URFs has been identified as the animal equivalent of the recently discovered blah blah blah, UFOL is it, and so on and so on. Okay, so I put these together. I take out whatever is in there. I'll take it out and leave it and just combine the subject and the verb. And so what I've done in the second sentence is then I use the information here that was in this what I call insertion, right? An insertion between the subject and the verb. I use that as my second sentence and say URFA6L is a blah 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 nucleotide reading frame and so on and so on and so on. So I make two sentences out of it. I shorten this one by making two sentences out of it. Now sometimes I want to be clear about this. When you do this, you might actually end up having more words when you shorten long sentences, short sentences, and that can be, and so you might have to go back and take out some extra words in the second round of revision when you do that consistently. But I tell you this much, that your reading quality, the reading quality of your text will dramatically improve when you work on your sentence length. And then I have a second level of revision, actually acting active voice, and even further shortening the long sentence. So rather than has been identified, we identified the smallest of the URFs as the animal equivalent of the recently discovered yeast, yada yada yada. UFOL is a something nucleotide reading frame. It overlaps out of phase. So you see what I've done, what I've talked about you before. I've taken this ing, this gerund, and made it into a new sentence. And so you end up with a fairly short sentence here, and that's okay. Sometimes I've had writers tell me, oh my God, my sentences can't be so short. Yes, they can. And you don't want to have every sentence be this short because it gets a little monotonous. But having a short sentence, it's almost like a breather for your reader. Like, oh my God, thank God it's a short sentence. I can, take a rest, take a breath, and move on to the more complex narrative in the text. Okay, so again, two levels of revision here, but it starts with putting the subject and the verb together, adding whatever the insertion is as a second sentence to it, and then working on that sentence further by taking out the gerund, even shortening it more. So you end up with three sentences instead of this one long sentence, and it makes it a lot more readable. So that's the first part of this paragraph. So the second part, starting with recently, we have the same problem. Recently, however, immunoprecipitation experiments with blah, 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 have indicated that 6 human URFs. So look at this. This is the whole sentence. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 4.5 lines. I mean, that's a little bit too long. So I've revised this in a couple of ways here. Sorry about this. Before we get to practice. So I started off with however, and so I added some sort of more of a framing or topic sentence here. A few studies have shown that several human URFs encode subunits of rotenone sensitive NAH something something reductase. So this comes from a little bit, I've taken parts of this first sentence and rather than going right into the detail, I provide an overview sentence. Then I talk about this large complex also contains many subunits synthesized in the cytoplasm and is referred to hereafter as respiratory chain NADH dehydrated something something of complex 1. So actually I've taken some of the information here and put it at the beginning. So what I've done here is all of this information that was reduced into one sentence, I kind of went through and reorganized it and started with the larger concepts first and then added the smaller concepts to explain. More specifically, right, I added a transition expression here, namely the 6 human URFs referred after this and this. And I actually taken this part out, so I just focused on the 6 human URFs, and they encode subunits on complex 1, as shown by recent immunoprecipitation experiments and enzyme fractionation. So I've taken information from this sentence and put it in here with the specific stuff on 6 human URFs. And then at the end, I added these URLs will be referred to subsequently as, and then I tell my reader it's going to be ND1, ND2, and so on and so on respectively. I leave that to the end rather than throwing all this information at the reader and trying to cram it into one sentence, which we often do, right? Because we feel like, oh my God, I got to put it all in one sentence. It really helps to pause a little bit and think about, okay, how can I present a sequence to my reader with shorter sentences, forcing yourself not to go over, a line and a half. And, this sentence is a little, it's a line and a half-ish. This one is a line and a half. This one here is a little longer. It has a lot of specific stuff. And then this one is again shorter. So we made 4 sentences out of just 2, and really helping our reader to move along. Now, from here to here took some work, particularly for me when I work with the writer, because I had to ask her to really make sure I'm understanding this correctly. So when you do this for your own work, it'll be a lot easier than it was for me working with my colleague on this, because you'll be the subject experts. But it's a great example of the same information presented in a much more effective way, and by reducing sentence length. And so again, reducing sentence length is really, we keep our reader in mind for that. So a reader doesn't have to, be out of breath and get lost in our complex sentence structures. All right, so you guys have to practice, 2 things I want you to practice. First of all, here is one long sentence I came up with that I want you to shorten up and be here as radical as you like. And you might have to add some transition expressions, such as, however frequently, in addition, for example, whatever. Be creative with this. Pretend this is your text and you're trying to make it a little bit more manageable and present it more manageably to your readers. So do that. And at the beginning of the next video, I'll show you how I revised it. And the second practice I want you to do, and this, you might not have time to do this today in class, but maybe you can work on it on your own. It's actually, this is one of the assignments I give my students in my class on these principles. I want you to think about trying that thinking about that you're convincing, let's say, the National Science Foundation. It's a U.S. institution that provides a lot of funding for scientists, but you can substitute any kind of organization that you would get funding from. But you want to convince them to make your topic a research priority in 2019. You only have 200 words to present your argument, not a lot. So here is the kick. I want you to write 2 versions. So the first version, I want you to only use 1, maximum 2 sentences. So your sentence can include as many words as you like. So I want you to really think about 150 to 200 words. So your sentences in here have to be very long, right? So I'm actually forcing you to do something that I don't think is good practice, but I want you to do that. So maximum of 2 sentences explaining to an organization whom you want funding from why they should make your topic a research priority, right? You have to persuade them, why is your topic important? So just 2 sentences, but up to 150 to 200 words. And then in the second version, I'd like you to do the same thing, convince the National Science Foundation or whatever organization you would like to write to in terms of making your topic a priority for this year. I want you to convince them, but only using sentences that are only 15 words max. So no more than 15 words. That's a whole sentence. So you're going to have a whole lot more sentences in there. So try both of these, and I'd be curious to hear from you which one was easier to write, which was harder to write, and when you read over them, which version you think is better. Okay? So again, if you don't have time in class today or in session today, if you want to do this as a practice on the side, it's a very useful exercise. My students had to do a reflection piece, had to do a couple paragraphs reflecting on this experience, and all of them said, like, oh my God, we hated this assignment, but it was so helpful, right? Because they really struggled with this part, and I wouldn't be surprised if you do that as well. And rightfully so, that's how I designed it. But they found it very useful, and I think it really brings home the point of how short sentences can be so powerful and effective in creating good narrative.